Hello, friends and neighbors, and welcome to the poem of the day for today, Wednesday, November the 26th, 2025. And we are continuing through with T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. Last video was a very short video. I read Canto 4, Death by Water, and it occurred to me afterward that because that's let's see, 7, 8, 9, 10, like 10 line canto that I probably could have read it and then done the commentary on it because there's not a whole lot that people know about that canto anyway. I probably could have done that all as one video, but then it would have messed up the rhythm of two per canto. So I just was content with that one being really short, and this one will be shorter than most of my notes and explanation videos anyway. So Death by Water is the fourth canto, and we have been talking throughout this series of recurring images of death by water or drowning throughout the wasteland. References to Ariel's Song in the Tempest, references to Ophelia who dies by drowning, and then of course there's a image of in Prufrock of being the ragged claws at the bottom of the sea, right? And so Death by Water here, we're told earlier in the poem, line 55 in Canto 1, when we're that section with Madame Sosostris, the clairvoyant, who is reading the tarot cards, the second half of line 55 is fear death by water. I see crowds of people walking around in a ring. Now, I think that crowds of people walking around in the ring is within the Unreal City, and that's where we go to next in Canto 1. But as she's pulling these cards, she's telling the person whose tarot she's reading to fear death by water. And there's also a mention of the wide-eyed merchant, which I almost said last class, last video I suggested could have been the Smyrna merchant from the Fire Sermon, Canto 3. And the other thing that's interesting about the connection back here is if you look at line 46, here, said she, is your card, the drowned Phoenician sailor. Those are pearls that were his eyes. Look. Okay, so then the pearls that were his eyes is the line from The Tempest, but then we get, your card is the drowned Phoenician sailor. Death by Water begins, Phoebus the Phoenician, a fortnight dead, forgot the cry of seagulls and the deep sea swell, and the profit and loss. So we go to what I'm presuming is the one who appears on the card, Phoebus the Phoenician, and fortnight dead, so that's 2 weeks, right? Forgot the cry of gulls, and we get that, throughout the rest of the stanza there, or throughout the rest of the poem, there hasn't been as much of a distinctive sonic quality to Eliot's work that we might have heard in some of his other poems, or really in poems that are less about kind of modernist experimentation by other authors. But here we're getting really heavy sonic qualities. So Phoebus the Phoenician, a fortnight dead, forgot. So we get that alliteration right at the beginning. And then afterward, we're getting some consonants with the S's. So the cry of gulls and the deep sea swell and the profit and loss. So the things that he's forgetting there are all above the surface, right? The cry of the gulls, the sea swell, and then profit and loss, which I'm taking to mean like one's economic concerns that bother us and occupy us and obsess us while we're alive. And that's the first kind of stanza of this canto. And what's interesting is it's 2.5 lines, and the next one just kind of picks up right underneath it as like a second half line. And it reads, a current undersea picked his bones in whispers. So he's only 2 weeks dead, but the erosion of the waves are already kind of picking off skin, flesh particles down all the way to the bones and starting to erode the bones here. And picking it away in whispers, I think, is such an interesting metaphor, because we've had whispers throughout the rest of this poem, and whispers that are threats of nothing. If you recall the woman waiting upstairs in her apartment, and the wind under the door, right? With the nothing can come of nothing. And so the whispers here are eroding him and making even the physical things that are left when you die, like your corpse, being slowly picked away. It says, as he rose and fell, he passed the stages of his age and youth. And I think there might be a double play here, right? Because then it says entering the whirlpool. As he rose and fell, and I assume that's with the current, that his corpse is rising and falling, but I also think it talks about his life as a sailor, right? Going on the waves, rising and falling, but also maybe just the normal trajectory of one's life and our ups and downs. He passed the stages of his age and youth, entering the whirlpool. And again, just with him being a sailor and then entering a whirlpool, we can sort of imagine that, there was a tempest, there was a storm, there was something tumultuous in his life there. But also the whirlpool takes me back to Canto 1 and thinking of the people moving around in circles right after we get the warning of death by water. And so I wonder if the whirlpool is also some sort of wandering around in a ring, a kind of aimlessness of an afterlife, of kind of like a limbo or a purgatory that Eliot's thinking about. But that this can also be in the water, right? In the whirlpool. Then we get another break, a half-line break that leads to a half-line. Gentile or Jew, O you who turn the wheel and look to windward, consider Phoebus, who was once handsome and as tall as you. So this evocation of Gentile or Jew is interesting because that's obviously a biblical allusion, but it also within the Bible covers everybody, right? You're either Jewish and you're a member of God's chosen people, or you're the people outside. And so it creates this sort of like there's two types of people, right? Gentile or Jew. So this is addressed to everyone, but it's you who turn the wheel and look to windward. And I've taken turning the wheel as, moving the wheel of time, but also turning the wheel of like, as you toil at your work, kind of turning the wheel of industry or machinery. But it's interesting that it's connected with whirlpool. So it's also kind of this almost like an orbiting as you go through your life, just kind of in these ruminations and these yearly orbits that we make. Look to windward. Consider Phoebus, who was once handsome and as tall as you. It seems to be a reminder there that even youthful, powerful, adventuresome, attractive people like Phoebus are all going to die, and they're going to just be kind of anonymous corpses in the water being picked away by the currents. Existing only as this sort of tarot card that you pick up that is a reminder of your fate, right? Something that you can't escape. Now, I talked yesterday about Eliot kind of having the idea that maybe there's something to other forms of magical thinking than religion, something like tarot. And here's another place where that might resonate. But then again, it is sort of just saying, remember that you are dust and to dust you shall return, ashes to ashes, everybody lives, everybody dies. Here's what's difficult about this canto. Not only is it shockingly short and shockingly focused, it does seem to give you kind of a lesson to it, which doesn't seem to be like the rest of the cantos. But there's also one note in the Norton. And the one note, I will tell you, says this. The exact significance of this section, which Pound insisted, that's Ezra Pound, insisted was an integral part of the poem, has always been very difficult to determine, especially since it is, as Pound well knew, a close translation of the ending of Dans le Restaurant, written by Eliot in 1918 before anything existed of the other four parts of the wasteland. I read elsewhere that this was a much, much longer canto, and Pound just slashed it down to these, 8, 9 lines that are in here. And yet, again, considered it integral to the part of the poem. I wonder why. I wonder if it's maybe kind of just this transition. We talked at the end of the fire sermon as there being this, bringing together Eastern and Western traditions with Buddhism and Christianity and trying, searching, grasping for some sort of mystical system that's going to have meaning and is going to allow for kind of a transcendence outside of this horrible world of disease, death, decay, and destruction. It also strikes me, though, that that's the fire sermon and it ends with burning, and now we have death by water. So there's a juxtaposition of those two images going on here, but also complicated aspects of those images. Water can be life-giving. It can also be destroying. And in this case, it's drowning, right? Burning can be burning that happens with desire. It can represent destruction. It can also be passion. And I think in that case, a kind of purgation or almost even a catharsis to it. I don't know. It's a vexing part of the poem, as a lot of the poem is. And that's all I'll say about it today. So if you have ideas that I didn't hit on or possible connections or suggestions about what it might mean, I would be really happy to hear that. So please feel free to chime in. Otherwise, thank you again for being here, and I'll be back tomorrow to read Canto 5 of The Wasteland. Peace be with you.